Well, first of all, thank you for coming on this incredibly hot day, and particularly those who had to do the Central Line, because that would be my nightmare of no air conditioning at all. Those on the Elizabeth Line wouldn't know what you're talking about. But I'm William Bird. I'm CEO of Intelligent Health. I'm also a GP, and my whole career has been how to actually do a lot of medicine without using pills and tablets. And of course now we're in a bit of a crisis of well-being, mental health, and it's even more important now to know how we actually deliver both in medicine and the medical side, but also in the employee side of how we get people to in their best performance, because there's so much problems going on and all of you are facing those problems in the workplace. So today's really just going to be a time to kind of explore how our thinking has been. Claire, who will introduce herself in a minute, and I think quite a few of you know her, and she has obviously got the expertise on leadership in the corporate side. I haven't got that expertise at all, but I do know how a person works, and so I can do some of the science. And then Luke here is going to talk about his experience, particularly in a high performance organisation as in Formula One. But we want all of you to really contribute at the end, because it's going to be a matter of learning from each other. You know, this is tough, this is difficult, and we're all struggling a little bit in this new world. First of all, just an introduction to Michael first, and then ask him if you can just say a few words about what it means on the College of Medicine. And then I'm going to hand over to Claire, and then Luke as well, just to do the introductions. In fact, why don't we just do the introductions first, because otherwise you're doing Claire. Do you want to just...
Hi, I'm Claire. I am a wellbeing leadership culture consultant. I work in partnership with Intelligent Health. I used to head up the global wellbeing strategy at Burberry, which is how I know Melissa, in our kind of high-end fashion world. And now I work with organisations, helping them from a strategic perspective, a leadership and culture perspective, and also on a kind of key lived experience subjects, things like burnout, managing stress. I have ADHD, so I talk a lot about neuro-inclusion as well, managing that, addiction, grief, so lots of lived experience I talk about as well. Working with a really great range of organisations from Channel 4, KPMG, HSBC, ESOP, Burberry as well, so a real good range, Harry Potter Studios, so being able to work with lots of different organisations and helping them create cultures where people are able to thrive in however that looks for the organisation and for the individuals who are there.
Hi everybody, so I'm Luke. I'm Employee Experience Lead at Lassie & Williams Racing. For those of you who are F1 fans, I probably don't need to explain what we do. For those of you who aren't, it's just racing cars round in a circle every couple of weeks. I've taken a bit of a squiggly career path in my lifetime. I spent probably the first 10 years in customer-facing roles, project management, client relationships, all of the classic client-facing roles, but then transitioned into wellbeing, employee engagement, diversity and inclusion consultancy for a few years, and then I took the big step in-house with an organisation called Simply Health. They do health plans, you know, you have a massage and claim the cost back. Moved to...
So dismissive.
Yeah, no, really useful, worthwhile. I can't believe I just described the concept of a health plan to a room of wellbeing professionals. And then I moved to Williams 7 months ago. So I was a Williams fan growing up. When I was 3 years old, my mum used to put me in front of the TV and I was obsessed with Nigel Mansell, Damon Hill. You can probably guess my age from that reference. So the opportunity to do what I love and what I care about for a team that I really care about was a full circle moment for me. It's challenging, and I'll talk a little bit more about that today, starting from almost scratch, it feels like sometimes, when identifying an approach to well-being in an environment where for years it's, you know, backs against the wall. Of course you work long hours, it's all about performance at the weekend. Finding a place for well-being can be tough, but I'll share more about that as the morning rolls on.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And just to say thank you for Michael. So Michael is a friend and another GP. He's also head of the Royal Medical Household. So I didn't realise there were 50 doctors in a Royal Medical Household. So again, that's another team of people under high pressure as well, because you have to get it right. And Michael's also the College of Medicine founder and co-chair. And the College of Medicine, which he'll talk about, is exactly in the alignment to what I've been trying to do all my time, which is how we know each other, is delivering medicine without the need of all the time of having surgery and pills and all the other things that are going on, which is making medicine really becoming less and less effective, and in fact even going the opposite direction, is causing some harm now. So how do we move both the well-being in the corporate and the delivery of health in the bigger scheme? How do we start to learn from each other and take this forward? And that's really what this connection with the College of Medicine. So Michael, can you just give us a couple of words about all your roles, really?
Well, thanks, William. I'm sorry I'm a bit overdressed, but from some rather early meetings this morning. But thanks for the introduction. College of Medicine, it's 15 years old. You've probably not heard of it. We recently had a 3-day conference at QE2 Hall in Westminster, and 2,700 people came over those 3 days. And as William says, it's really about looking at medicine beyond pills and procedures, and perhaps in 3 respects. The one thing we're really keen on is personalised care, is that connection between doctor and other health professional and patient, which we're losing, the continuity. Medicine's often becoming a transaction, the arm, the leg, the operation, not the whole person, not looking at people in the round, which is so important, and restoring that personal connection. The second thing about the college is we look beyond the pills and procedures, so very much at the psychosocial as well as the biomedical. We introduced something called social prescribing, which you may have heard of, which is the idea of fitting things to where people are. So if somebody is lonely or isolated, it's about helping them to make relationships. And social prescription really is using the community resources, sweating local resources in order to help people. And at the core are the 3,000 link workers throughout the country in every GP practice and available to every patient, who find out where you are, what you need, and maybe you're not one of those 20% of the adult population going on antidepressants, which is pretty depressing in itself, but maybe there might be something else that might help you, going on a walk, creating social connection, arts interventions, physical interventions, whatever. And that link worker will find out what grabs you, what gives you meaning and significance, and then often take you to that first session or whatever, because often it's a question of motivation and the rest of it to actually change things. So social prescription is a big thing of what we do, but also looking outside the box generally. So looking at different medical traditions, acupuncture, hypnosis, things that are a little bit different that people can do for themselves, and often the conventional medics have neglected. Then the third element, which is really crucial, and all this sort of reflects a bit in your roles, is making that connection between medicine and the community. Traditionally, you go into the GP surgery, you go into the hospital, but from now onwards, we need to actually come out into the community, and the community needs to be part of creating health, and it needs to be a cooperative thing, not something we do as medics to people, but something we help people to do for themselves and for each other in communities. So that's, if you Google College of Medicine, you'll see a bit more of what we do, but anyone's welcome to join. All of you, come and join. It's only 30 quid a year, and you'll see we've got some really interesting stuff going on. Going rapidly on to work, absolutely crucial. Everyone knows that it's good for your health. I used to work with Dame Carol Black, who was president of the College of Physicians and then worked for DWP. In those days, we really recognised that work was something that gave people meaning, significant, but also helped them to live longer and live healthier. And conversely, in my surgery, too often I see people for whom work is actually not doing that. They feel there's either personal interaction or they don't feel valued or whatever. And so often people are coming to our surgeries wanting sick certificates simply because they and the work are not getting on with each other. And the NHS is actually a prime bad quantity in that respect. I mean, we lost 20,000 doctors last year to the UK. And given that they're 250,000 to train each doctor, just work out the maths of that and how careless it is to have lost them. The reason why is not to do with payment. It's not because they're paying more on the beaches in Australia or the money in America. It's because they've not been valued. When William and I trained, we were all great idealists. We were so committed to the health service, but we were also valued. We had breakfast rooms for doctors, we had car parking, we had places we could sleep at night. The current doctors don't get any of that. They don't feel valued, they don't feel that they've been looked after, so their loyalty is zero, and therefore they go off for the best opportunity. And I think loyalty is so crucial. And in the medical household, we've been very fortunate. We had a sort of 15-year run-up with the Prince of Wales, because he asked me to form a medical household in 2009. And so when we moved to Buckingham Palace in 2022, we already had a team that had been, incidentally, none of them paid, they all do it voluntarily, but we had a team which had been abroad on various expeditions, which met twice a year, which really got on with each other, which valued each other. There were certain perks, which so people felt thanked and they felt rewarded. And today it's a really great team, and they're very loyal. I don't think we've never had a bust up, in 16, 17 years, and we haven't lost anyone except for when they've got old and retired. And I think that is so crucial. It's that sort of whole feeling of a team, a feeling that you're doing it together and that it's valuable and that it's doable, not asking people to do an undoable job. So I'm really grateful to be working with Intelligent Health, because it seems to me that this is a great mixing of two cultures, and what you are doing is so incredibly important. I mean, not only how you do it, but if you like, the fact of your existence in your roles, because I think we're moving to a different era where we realise that you can't take people for granted, and actually it's not very nice to do that anyway. But in total utilitarian terms, you're not going to make profits if you've got an unhappy workforce that's walking unhappy, etc. So it's really good to be here. It's good to, in fact, I'm here really to learn, because I didn't know about this wealth of roles that you've all got. Fascinating too. And so I think this is much more of an interaction than a sort of didactic session, but it's a great pleasure to be here, and great to be working with you lot.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks. So Claire and I are going to go through a couple of presentations now, quite short, because we want to then hear from Luke, and then we also want to hear from you as well. So just to build on that of value, I'm going to go through what our principles are. And so the human being is quite straightforward, because we're just, I'm afraid, an animal. And all animals throughout the entire animal kingdom, number one thing is being safe. That's what our whole evolution has been. And everything pretty much we're designed to be is at safety, because that's what survival's all about. But there's also, as what Michael said, is feeling valued. And if you don't value yourself, you don't have a value, then there's going to be no reason to feel safe, because it doesn't matter. But the more value you have, the more you want to be safe and prosper and be productive. So feeling valued is a huge important. It's one of the real basics in neuroscience. And then the third one is, and we'll talk about that, human beings particularly, is about belonging to community. We have an absolute drive for belonging. The reason the Homo sapiens did so well is we were the only ones that collaborated. And as we'll see, when you collaborate, you can actually get as much production, but for less energy, because people are sharing the workload. So they're the three really important things that are there. And then if you look at the domains of our life, you've got the people around us, you've got the place around us, and you've got us as our purpose. So when you put safe, valued and belong down here, and you put people, purpose, place there, you get this sort of matrix. And this is really the fundamental matrix of any person or organisation. So the first one is trust, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That's about people feeling safe, feeling valued, is about listening to people, feeling respected. Belonging is about that community, whether it's a workplace community, but that real feeling of belonging. The autonomy is about having control in your life and having that feeling of optimism as well. At the bottom, and this is the one we often forget, is our values have to be aligned with the values of the place and the people around us. If those values are malaligned, it's hugely stressful. And we find that people will start to compromise on their values. And when you compromise on your values, your discipline and everything else starts to fail. So having the values of the company going together. And then the place is that psychological safety we hear a lot about, secure. And then you've got the resonance where you feel that you're absolutely aligned to, again, the place. And then there's that rootedness, which is the kind of heritage, a culture of an organisation. And then if you get all of those right, you've got that middle bit, which is fulfillment. It's where we're optimised completely to the best. And those are our kind of building blocks. And for some of us, some of them will be really strong and some of us not quite so strong. Probably this is the most important area, going down to perhaps less on the left side, but that is what we tend to use as this matrix. And then we can measure different, by doing questions, we can measure different values of those squares so that you can actually understand where as a company you are, and that will actually go through and just help that kind of health creation index. So let's have a look and see what the science behind this is. So if you have a stressor, a stress coming, you get acute stress. We need acute stress. We need lots of acute stress. And the reason why it's acute stress is that we know that we'll get over it. We know that we have the ability to pass through it and get out the other side. When you've got a low health creation index, it moves to chronic stress. There, the perception is that I'm not going to be able to get through. I'm out of control. I don't have the ability to be able to cope with that acute stress. So it goes to chronic stress. And in the body, acute stress is lots of adrenaline, butterflies, that kind of thing, all fine. Chronic stress is lots of cortisol and noradrenaline and other things. That's not good. It changes your entire body. Everything changes in that person when they're in chronic stress. And these stress hormones come out. And arguably, as I say there, that's probably the biggest cause of health problems. So poor health creation, chronic stress, negative emotions, and not really, they're all emotions to help us. They're anxiety, keep us away from danger. There's aggression, fight and flight. There's depression, sickness behavior. So all of those emotions actually are normal and they're there to protect us. But of course, in the light of everything else, they're not very pleasant to have. The unhealthy behaviors, we say, well, why don't you just go and do some exercise? Why don't you just eat a normal diet? Why don't people do that? Because our brains, when we're in chronic stress, are trying to get energy in. So we're vigilant. You don't want to be asleep when a hunter-gatherer and you're about to be killed by some bear. So when you're under chronic stress, you have less sleep, which is normal. You become inactive. There's a hormone that actually stops you being active when you're stressed. It's called ghrelin, and it's there to save energy. You don't want to be burning off excess energy when you're under stress. You've got to conserve every single calorie because as a hunter-gatherer or as an animal, you need to preserve those. Poor diet. Well, it's not really a poor diet. It's a diet to get as many calories in as possible. Fat and sugar, that's what we crave when we're chronically stressed. Why? Because you want those calories in. And we store it in our middle, so we get fatter down here. It's all normal. It's all protection. It's all completely the body doing exactly what it's designed to do. But we keep on saying, but I'm just rubbish at doing my gym. I keep on stopping. When you're chronically stressed, you're fighting against every single part of your body that's trying to protect you. What it wants you to do is to sit down and just eat. And then you'll be safe because you'll have loads of calories in there. And that is what your body, and addictions are really just a way of just masking that horrible feeling when you're stressed. But also your brain loses inhibitions. And that's on purpose, so you can make quick decisions. So when a lion is about to jump at you, you don't get a spreadsheet out and do a cost-benefit analysis of which side you're going to jump, you just jump. So all those inhibitory pathways have been got rid of under chronic stress, so addictions become much easier and they mask it. So that's the kind of what's happening, and if you take it all the way down, you start to get obesity and the gut biome, and then you get this chronic inflammation where the immune system is starting to catch up, and then you get mitochondrial dysfunction in the cells, this is all the really nasty stuff that's happening without us realizing it, and that leads to all the diseases. So that's health on a page. And it all started here. It doesn't start with unhealthy behaviors. You cannot make someone change their behavior if they're chronically stressed or if they're really in a bad way. We all know that from our own lives. And if you think there's this new energy constraint model, think of us as we can think of as a company, think of us as a kind of, we've got calories in and we have energy out. The species that are going to do the best need the least energy for the least calories for the most energy. So any organism that can convert efficiently calories to energy will win, and they'll do better. And the ones that can't do it will die out. And we're pretty good. In fact, the mitochondria, which is in the cell, is 99% efficient at changing calories to energy. It's the most efficient system, which is why every single living species does it. But the energy is split. You've got your vital energy, which is your heart going, your lungs and everything normally. You've got your growth, maintenance, repair, which is including our creativity in our brain, which just helps us be who we are. And then you've got the stress. It's elastic. That can go up and down, which includes physical activity. So when you've got big stress, acute stress, you'll squeeze that that growth, maintenance, repair, because the vital energy has to keep going. You can't change that. So that gets squeezed. Acute stress, fine, lasts a day or two and you're out of it. But you imagine that happening all the time for months and months and months and months. Where's the repair? You start to get problems. And the brain shuts down because it's such a gobbler of energy that the whole prefrontal cortex starts to shut down to conserve energy because you've got so little here to do it. And what we really should be doing is trying to increase that, reduce that chronic stress, but also just by having lower calories and actually physical activity makes that vital organ more efficient, slows the heart rate down. So the more fitness we can do. And then you've got massive amount of brain power, your cells are working, you're efficient, toxins have gone away. That's what we're trying to do. And if you look at health creation, it's at the top. Prevention's the next one down, which is lifestyle. Medical prevention is screening and hypertension and other things, and then treatment at bottom. This is where we should be aiming. Not so much here. This is okay, we need to do this, but we've got to get that right first. And that's really what we're trying to do. So I always think, if you kind of think the Headless Horseman, was it, I can't remember which film it was. Someone tell me.
Sleepy Hollow?
No, it was from one of the Tolkien films anyway.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, it's Lord of the Rings, I think it was. But as you can't see it, Claire, that's really clever. So prevention is all about running away from disease. There's a lack of diabetes. That's not a nice place to be. Whereas health creation, talking about the Tolkien type of thing, is about a destination where you feel safe, you feel valued. And that's where every company should be, that destination where you're feeling really safe. Yes, you can have acute stress, lots of it, but you've then got to have those rest periods, which we'll hear about in a second. So just the final bit, animals that collaborate have an advantage. Every single animal that collaborates uses less energy. So they lose less energy. So human beings, it's about trust. We can only collaborate when we've got trust, and oxytocin is the hormone that comes out to allow us to connect. In acute stress, we get lots of oxytocin and we all bind together. In chronic stress, the oxytocin disappears. So in chronic stress, nobody trusts anyone else. We push people away. We put our heads down. So chronic stress increases lack of trust. That is really important. You can't have the two. That creates all these pretty nasty problems here. And if you look at and lots has been done trust, I'm sure you know. For high trust, 50% more productive, 10%, 100% more energy from staff, 76 more engaged at work, people stay. Everything that Michael was saying in the NHS, we're so bad at trust for management. But if you get it right, you've got a workforce that's going. And that's because you've reduced that chronic stress. We haven't reduced the acute stress, that's fine. We've reduced that chronic stress. So there we go. I'm going to hand over to Claire to talk about then what does that mean? How do we make it then all work?
I was reflecting on what you were saying. A few days ago, I did something to my shoulder while lifting very, very small weights to be shameful. And I have been just the crabbiest person since. Like, my daughter will ask me stuff and I'm like, I can tell that my whole body is just focusing on, like, I've only got patience to manage the pain, and beyond that, like, I can't do anything else, I can't concentrate, I can't focus, I can't be polite, I can't be nice. And that really kind of talking about that, when you're in that survival mechanism, whatever that is, whether you're feeling under threat, you're feeling stressed, you're feeling unsafe, you're feeling in pain, like, all of the rest just gets deprioritized. And I was very aware of that. I was like, I'm being a crabby mummy because I've got a very sore shoulder, so I apologise for that. So building on that idea, there were so many things I thought I could say, and I tried to, like, prioritise into, like, my 3 main things. And I think it comes to organisational, cultural, when it comes to being able to create an environment where people are able to thrive, where people are able to be at their best, and therefore are able to perform. And the first one is about creating an environment where people feel safe. I know, and I have been in many environments where you just don't feel safe, where there's that lack of psychological safety. One of the organisations I worked in many years ago, very, very psychologically unsafe environment, and I remember that our CEO would say, I don't really care about sorting this out right now, I just need to know who's to blame. And when you're all kind of trying to avoid this blame, it's like, what, you know, who's coming for me, I'm going to be in trouble, you're under that pressure, you're feeling that, you know, that tiger, that saber-toothed tiger coming at you, and you'll do anything to be able to avoid that. You're less likely to be innovative, you're less likely to be collaborative, you're not at your best at all. So how can we create environments where people feel able to innovate, they feel able to grow and perform at their best? So just thinking about, what is it, when we're in survival mode, how are we behaving? And William talked about this a lot already, but we are focusing on the threats. So we are scanning for threats. We are looking for people in our teams that are sending emails and we're getting affronted by them. We are saying, oh, you're trying to, you know, push this, or this isn't working. We're likely to be responding aggressively, we're likely to be blowing up about things when perhaps they needn't be. When we see a problem, we see this catastrophe rather than, okay, well, it's just, you know, a curveball that we need to shift with. You're always protecting yourself, you're avoiding mistakes, you're less likely to take risks, you're less likely to think things through, you're really reacting very fast. As you said, you're sort of jumping to get out of the way of that lion or that tiger, instead of thinking about, what is it I need to do here? What is the overall plan? What are we trying to achieve here? And then you're staying safe, so you're never pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. And this all makes complete sense when you're in survival mode. You just have to prioritise surviving, and everything else just becomes a deprioritisation. But when people are feeling safe, when we're in organisations where people are feeling safe, people are much more likely to be creative when it comes to problem solving. When you're psychologically safe, people are going to be able to say, I don't think this works, or we could try something else. What are some of the things that we could do differently? And I don't know if anyone's read Matthew Said's book, Rebel Ideas. I recommend it. I use it a lot when it comes to thinking about psychological safety and being able to embrace that diversity of thought. An example he uses of lack of psychological safety was in NASA. I don't know what NASA's like now, but NASA used to be a very, very unpsychologically safe company to work in, very hierarchical, and they were launching a rocket, and it was the first civilian being launched into space. I think she was a school teacher, and some of the more junior engineers had noticed that there were issues, and they kept trying to raise them, and the more senior people were being like, no, you know, how dare you, you're junior here, this isn't, you know, this isn't the way we do things. They started to realise that the more that they were kicking up a fuss, the more they were kind of there was black marks against them. It was making them suffer in terms of their roles. So they stopped saying anything. And then when the rocket actually went to take off, it exploded. And the things that the junior people had been raising were completely accurate, but because of the culture and the lack of safety, none of that stuff was listened to, which then had such a massive, massive impact, because people weren't able to challenge the status quo. They weren't able to say, well, I know we might have always done it this way, but it doesn't work anymore. And when you think about things like tech and that innovation, you need to listen to the young, don't you, and say nobody uses Facebook anymore, this is the latest thing, and not always be going, well, we're stuck in our ways, we want to stay this way because this is the way we've always done it. This is the way everyone who is senior here enjoys working. We've gone through this before in the past, so therefore that's what we're going to do going forward. So being able to create that environment where people feel able to share ideas, they need to be able to feel authentic and say, you know, this is my background, and actually our differences bring a quality here. They help us be better, because I can talk to you about something in my experience, my socioeconomic background, my race, my gender, my neurodivergence. There are so many different ways in which people see the world, process ideas, and the more that we're able to make people feel safe to be able to share those ideas, the better. We've got to have a competitive advantage when people are able to share their ideas, challenge the status quo, and feel safe to be able to do that. So what can we do to create an environment where people feel able to be in performance and not survival? And I think a lot of the time, unfortunately, we create environments where people are always surviving. They're trying to recover at the weekends, get back in. Okay, I just need to get through this. I just need to get through this. So what are some of the ways that perhaps companies inadvertently put everybody in their organizations into survival mode? Inconsistent communications. We as human beings feel safer when we have certainty, right? We can survive if we know what's happening next. When's our next meal coming? You know, do we have shelter? Do we have a tribe around us who support us? When your organization is being really inconsistent, perhaps leaders are acting one way, speaking another way, there are expectations, and then expectations shift when everything feels really ambiguous, then people are gonna feel that stress. They're gonna feel that lack of safety, and then they're not gonna feel they're gonna be able to be in performance. Toxic leadership. It's a whole kind of event on its own. The way that people behave, it trickles down. My brother-in-law said to me, I think that it was a bold statement, but I loved it. I think that the culture of an organisation is based completely around the childhood of its CEO. Because whatever's happening there is trickling down and down and down. And I was like, yeah, I can really see what you're saying there. And I remember talking to another person who was an old colleague of mine, and she was talking about a new organisation that she's joined. And I said, what's so great about the culture, and why do you think it's working? And they're a coaching and consultancy business. And she said, actually, we all get free therapy, and we have to do the therapy, and it's part of the process. She said, so everyone is really aware of the impact they have, the behaviours, their knock-on effect, the ripple effect that they're making. So she's like, so it's not even about the fact that we have great processes or policies, which are wonderful, but if the behaviours aren't backing that up day to day, I have so many examples of people saying, well, I know that we can take this amount of time off if we go through a miscarriage or we have a bereavement, but I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare. My manager would really hold it against me. So actually the reality of what you're saying on paper, what your handbook is saying, what you're saying in your PR when you're entering awards, people are saying, well, day to day, that doesn't affect me. That's not what I'm experiencing. And then we also need to have talked about embracing diverse perspectives. We are better, and Apple's catchphrase is, we are all different, and that's our greatest strength. Because it's like, how do you tap into all of these different resources you have? Instead of creating a culture and environment that only celebrates, listens to, and rewards the loudest, often it is the people who are active thinkers, can think on the spot, speak up in meetings, are good at networking, are good at kind of being visible. But there are so many people, introverts, reflectors, people with neurodivergence, that actually need more time to be able to reflect, who need more time to be able to perhaps feedback through email. So giving people different ways to be able to capture people's thoughts is so important, and that creates inclusion, it creates safety, but it also gives you that competitive advantage because you are leveraging the skills of people that aren't always normally heard in classic meeting culture, classic communication culture. And then balancing periods of intensity and rest, which we'll talk about more when we chat to Luke, because that if anybody knows about that kind of period, then it's going to be someone working in the F1. And then having that growth mindset culture. We all make mistakes, we're human beings, let's humanise workplace. We make mistakes, how do we learn from it? Instead of thinking about, well, how is that going to be a black mark against me? How am I going to be kind of punished for that going forward? This is my favourite one, and I think it's one that often we try. It can be free. You can do it for free, but it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of leaders changing their behaviour. So many organisations just spend so much time spending time on nonsense. Meeting after meeting after meeting, internal projects, over collaboration, lack of people actually making decisions. And I see this when you look at kind of the recruitment, where people are going through 12-stage recruitment processes because no one has the nerve to actually just make a decision. So when it comes to being able to prioritise performance, we need to focus on the things that matter. And I have been doing that for myself personally. I try and do like an annual vision. What is my vision for the year? Because there are so many things we could be doing. If anyone's read the book 4,000 Weeks, it talks about on average, we have 4,000 weeks to live. So that's all we got. And even if we deprioritised everything we hate doing and only did the things we love, we still wouldn't have time to do all the things that we want to do. So that's quite scary when you think about that. How much time are we actually spending doing stuff that we don't want to do versus spending this time that we do want to do? So how can we think more about how we intentionally deprioritise? And when we do that in a work culture, what is the actual business objectives this year? What is it we're trying to do? What are some of the things that maybe we're getting caught up on? Let's have a meeting about this, or let's push this project forward. Is this important right now? Is this something that could be deprioritised? Do we all need to be in this meeting? Could this meeting be an email? Could this meeting be a voice note? Could it be a video? I have spent weeks and weeks going back and forth. An example actually from when I was working at Burberry, and I was in a meeting and there were 7 of us in the meeting, 2 directors, like 2 senior managers, and we had this meeting and then it was like, okay, so should we rearrange and have another call next week? And I was like, could we perhaps just one of us from one team and one of us from the others cut, and the rest of us just not join the call? And I was like, oh, everyone's so excited by the idea. It's like, we don't have to join the call. It's like, actually, if you look at the cost of how many of us and how many senior people are in this call, just this hour alone, and then the time it takes to rearrange, can we be thinking about who actually needs to catch up on this stuff, who doesn't need to catch up on this stuff? So much inefficiency when people are just stuck in meetings, stuck catching up about stuff that doesn't really matter. So many ways in which this creates an inefficiency in our system and the way that we're not able to then focus on the things that really, really matter. Micromanagement, no respect for focus time. It's like between the hours of 9 to 5, your meeting, your diary is for free game. Like you can have, we'll put in as many meetings as you can. Oh, if you need to do your work, well, you'll do that in the evening, right? No wonder these people are working in survival mode. No wonder they're fed up. No wonder they're actually not performing or hitting the targets they need to, because every meeting is more work, but not any time to actually do it. So how can you rethink about how you're approaching meetings, so you're giving people time to actually do their work, to be able to focus? What is it? What is the vision? What are we trying to achieve as a team? And what are our expectations as a team? And perhaps we are really clear that we don't expect people to be responding after a certain time at night. That, yes, we might have a million different platforms. Am I contacting you over Slack? Or is it Teams? Am I emailing you? Am I WhatsApping you? There's so many things. I know that I have been in the experience where you're just checking all of the platforms to check that you haven't missed anything urgent, and then not actually being able to focus and feeling that, oh, there must be something that I'm missing. I'm feeling that kind of survival mode kicking in. Perhaps there's expectations you can be sharing as a team, where you say, if you're in focus time, nobody will bother you. We're not expecting you to answer emails, but if there's something urgent, we'll call you. And then you know, if I'm not being called, I can spend this time and I can focus. Or it's anything that has actions comes through via email. Anything that isn't urgent will come through via Slack. You know, just for example, it's coming up with what those expectations are and not thinking about everything being urgent all the time, because is it realistically as urgent as it needs to be? Not everything is that urgent. And then my last point before we start chatting to Luke a bit is I often think that we try as organisations, and I've seen this a lot when I'm working with kind of fast growing startups, but it's such an intense time, we have to really, really go for it. It's like, but if it's always intense, then when is it not intense? I remember listening to a podcast recently and they were talking about the word priority. Priority is meant to be singular. It was only like in the past decade or two that we've made it a plural, because it's not supposed to be a plural. You're supposed to have that one priority and everything else is supposed to sit underneath it. But capitalism made it a plural. So what are our priorities? And I know I will do that. Well, I will write a list and I'm like, okay, these are my 15 priorities. And then I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, I achieve none of them. I end the day feeling burnt out, frazzled, and I don't feel proud of myself. So I've started being like, what is my actual number one priority that I have to get done today? What's like my number 2 and my number 3? And then beyond that, it's nice to have. When we are organisations, we need to think about what are intense periods of time and how are we preparing for those. So if you work in, say, finance, for example, and you've got your end of year and you're working up to your end of year, then we understand that's going to be intense and people are going to have to really kind of step it up. But how are you preparing for that? How are you making sure that the quarter before that is perhaps a bit more restful, or that people are able to kind of equip themselves, get their toolkit ready, make sure that they have got enough petrol in the tank, to use an F1 reference, to make sure that you are able to get through that intense periods of time? And then how are you being conscious about how you rest and relax afterwards? So when is it actually needed? We're talking about that kind of singular priority. Peak, you can't be, for there to be a peak, there has to be a trough. So when you're saying yes to this intensity, when is there going to be the trade-off? When are you going to have those times of rest? How do you prepare and recover from each of these times? So, right, we're going through private equity. The next 6 months is going to be really intense. So how are we going to prepare and how are we going to make sure that we're resting, recovering, and giving people that chance to kind of come back into performance mode afterwards? Is it urgent, or are we actually just too afraid to prioritise? I think so many people just say everything's urgent. Force yourself to pick one. Everything you say yes to, you have to say no to something else. So when you say yes to this, what are you prepared to say no to? You can't say yes to everyone. And once you actually start to think about the fact that it is a seesaw, and every yes, there is an equal and opposite no. And there might be times where you're saying, I'm saying yes to work and I'm saying no to going to the gym, or I'm saying no to spending time with my family. But next month, I'm saying yes to that and I'm saying more no to this. How do you kind of have those peaks and troughs? What can we intentionally deprioritise? I've often found that much more helpful in thinking about not just what are my top priorities, but what are the things that really don't need to happen right now. An example from my personal life, I love DIY, I've got so much DIY to do in my house, but I've had to actively deprioritise it because otherwise I start just doing DIY and I need to be working, and it's like, what do I do to make sure that I am taking time? August is a lot quieter in my work, so therefore August I'll do some DIY, and then whenever I think I should be doing that, I think no, I've booked it for August, that's when I'm going to do it. So how do you deprioritise that stuff? Just to leave on a story, this is from very early on in my career. I used to work for a company called The Mind Gym, which many of you will have heard of, and I was working with a client, O2, and we used to do lots of regular sessions with them. And we had some sessions coming up and we didn't have a facilitator for them. I was like 22 and we were all like absolutely panicked about it. Oh my God, what can we do? What can we do? And we ended up flying in a facilitator from Italy to do the sessions. And after the sessions, we checked in with the client. She said, yeah, everything went really great. She said, I noticed that you flew the facilitator in from Italy. She's like, were you struggling to find a facilitator? And we were like, oh, yeah. She's like, you could have just talked to me. She's like, you could have asked and said if it was possible to move them. She's like, it wasn't like that urgent. We could have done them on another day. Do feel free, if there's a struggle, to push back or to ask if there's lenience or leeway. And that was always a really good message to me, that our clients, sometimes things are non-negotiable, but I think often we jump to the assumption that things are non-negotiable, and do everything we possibly can at the sake of our sanity, our health, to get things done, rather than having a upfront conversation about managing expectations, asking really what is it that matters, and having that conversation. And then that helps you know actually what to prioritise and what you might be able to deprioritise. So how can you spend some time consciously thinking about what are we doing to put people in survival mode, and how can we take them out of that survival mode? What are some of the ways in which our culture is contributing to that? What is the noise that we need to strip out? And there might be some things that are outside of your control, but there may be things that are within your control. How do you, within your immediate team, think about how you are being more intentional about the meetings you have, being more intentional about the emails you send, the communications that you're having? And then what does your year look like, and how can you plan that year as much as you can, because there's so many factors that aren't within your control, but with the stuff that's within your control, how can you plan for times when you are going to be at peak performance, but then making sure that you have time to recover? Because if you just try to perform kind of at 80% all the year, then you don't have that space to go up to 100% or 110% when you need to. Okay.
Thank you very
So
much
that's everything
indeed.
from me.
There's loads there, absolutely loads of useful points. And perhaps we can now move over to Luke to know how this works in practice in a high performance, probably the highest performance, and as you said all the time, but you are very visible when things don't go well, and dare we say last weekend was perhaps one of those weekends. How do you pick the team up and make sure that almost it's back to complete normal?
Sure. I can build, I think, on lots that William and Claire have shared in terms of practical things, but I think it's worth being ultra honest and starting almost from the beginning, because I shared that Williams has been around for 35 years as a team. Lots of glory days early on, but it's worth acknowledging that Williams hasn't won anything for about 30 years. We're going to need a Baddiel and Skinner song soon. But that means that when I walked into Williams 7 months ago, there is a pre-existing culture of backs against the wall. The way we do things as a team is working through the night, and it's almost a badge of honour. It's a positive thing to be in that stressful phase. So it's quite a lot to unpick, and to be completely honest, we're at the beginning of that journey. But where I started was, it's really important to identify a really compelling narrative as to why well-being is important and beneficial. Because if I just walked into a room of Williams senior leaders and said, we need to talk about well-being, they would instantly switch off, roll their eyes, worst case, laugh me out the room. So I was conscious I needed to really establish a strong narrative. And I started with what well-being is not, because I think that's important, because people assume it's really simple, it's really easy. It's not at all. So I'm not saying that everybody needs to down tools at 5 p.m. every day and leave, even when there's a pile of carbon fibre that needs to become a car in 2 days' time. That is not what well-being is. It's not just benefits. It's not a fluffy HR topic. If you start there, then people might start thinking, okay, well, I'm not going to be told that well-being is this easy thing we need to focus on. Then you can start to move towards what it actually is. And I think we've heard a lot about what well-being can be. And to me, it's having a structure, a framework, so policies, etc. But it's bringing it to life in a tangible way. So it's purpose, connection to purpose. And Williams has a brilliant potential for that, because we're on this comeback journey. Everybody wants to get back to winning multiple F1 titles. That's our vision as a team. And to use the overused NASA piece around the janitor who was asked, what's your job here? And he said, I'm sending a spaceship to the moon. We want everybody within Williams, if they are asked, why are you here? Whether you're a mechanic or a driver or you're a finance business partner, we want them to say, I'm sending Williams back to the top of the grid. So if we can create that really strong connection to our purpose and our vision, that's an element of well-being. It's working with our leaders and managers to understand why it's important. And I think the key language I use is, yes, Formula One is high pressured. It relies on intense dedication and commitment from our employees. Well-being does not replace that. It's not instead of that. It instead completely unlocks it. You can't have one without the other. So high performance is totally based on the wellness and engagement of our colleagues. And the last thing I'll say before we open up into sort of questions is, you might not even call it well-being. We haven't quite decided on that. Well-being can be off-putting to people who don't believe in it. You might call it sustainable high performance, you might call it human fitness, whatever it is. I think it needs to be really bespoke to the industry and team that you're in, so that you're speaking the language of your leaders, your managers. And once you've identified that narrative, you can start to weave together all the things that you want to do, or all the things that you're probably already doing under the wellness banner, but perhaps colleagues aren't using them. So I mentioned health plans earlier. Williams has a health plan, £600 a year colleagues have to claim things on, chiropractic, physio. I think the usage of that pot is like 2% across the team. So we're already paying for that. It's a low-hanging fruit. Can we not just communicate it and advertise it under the banner of sustainable high performance? So for me, it's starting right at the very beginning. What is that compelling narrative? And then you can knit together everything that you do under it.
And I have a question around, if you're thinking about your drivers, right? They race every 2 weeks, and you have this kind of really intense weekend, and then there must be a period of time where they have to, I don't know, get in ice baths or do real kind of intense recovery. How do you kind of use some of those learnings, or some of the things that actually your kind of key players in your organisation are using? How can you use some of that theory to, if they can do it, then why can't people in the organisation do it? What tips would you say in terms of using that knowledge in a more kind of office or mechanical environment?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and actually the risk is that you end up creating an us and them there, because people see the drivers as on a different planet, and they think they have an intense weekend, but then they're flown on their private jet back to Monaco, and the risk is
pick up the pieces.
People, literally, people back at the garage get a delivery back of the car that they've just driven into a wall and have to work overnight. So there is a risk there. But I think that 100% you need to, I think was it Chelsea you work for as well? So similar sporting environment, and obviously the squad are probably seen as on a different planet to the workforce. So that again, there's a definite risk, but in my opinion, if you're in an elite sporting environment in particular, everybody should have at least a degree of that sporting mindset, and the company needs to unlock that for people. So it's all very well saying you need to treat yourself with the same level of intense recovery as a driver, but unless you give them the
actual
safety and the space to do that, it won't work. And Formula One is particularly intense. During the racing season, it's just race to race, getting a car on the grid. And I thought naively that when the season finishes, it would be a really 2 months, 3 months of downtime. It's not at all. That is the busiest time, because people are building the car for the next race. So there isn't actually an opportunity for intense recovery in there. So it starts to become more personalised. So individually, within your shift patterns and within our ways of working, how can, based on your preference and where you are, how can you take time away and know that you won't be judged by it or a black mark put against your name, as I think has been mentioned. So company-wide, it's very difficult to do something, but we need to bespoke it to individuals and make sure people have that space and time.
So kind of normalising micro recovery, right? Because I know this, especially with people who are at screens a lot of the time, or kind of focused, is like even just going and boiling the kettle and not checking your phone and just kind of letting yourself have 5 minutes for your brain to decompress and process stuff can be. It's obviously not going to fix everything, but the more that you're able to regularly do that, the more that you're kind of going up into fight or flight and then coming back down, rather than just kind of keeping going up and up and up. And it's like, how do you normalise some of those small things throughout the day and empower people to do them and understand the value of them?
Definitely. And I think helping people understand the importance of self-regulation and some of the things that you've shared. I think us in the room probably get this stuff, but someone who's sat at a desk or building a car day in, day out probably doesn't get the concept of the stress bell curve of wanting to be at that peak and possibly falling over the edge. I think, to use a really practical example, we have a toil policy at Williams that is constantly not used properly because people feel they can't take their toil day. Or you'll hear people saying, I don't understand why, when I've worked a 2-day weekend, why I have to take my toil day within 2 weeks. That's our policy. And it's just communication. We need to be transparent. The reason why you need to take it within 2 weeks is because the point is you've worked over and you need to recover. Whereas people think it's overly prescriptive and it's like a punitive thing. They want to save them up and take a holiday of 2 weeks in 6 months. You're like, that's not the point. The point of a toil day is that you have an intense moment of recovery. So it's that narrative again. At the moment, there's like this unhealthy thing that people think, toil isn't great. It doesn't suit me. We just need to be clear about why it exists and have managers apply it in a consistent way. So again, it goes back to that firm narrative.
And have leaders take their toil days and shout about it, right? This is what I did with my toil day, and I spent some time with my kids, or I, went for a walk, and often that storytelling piece makes you go, oh, if they can do it, then I can do it too. And it's kind of like leading by example rather than prescription.
Yeah, completely agree. And I would say that I think that's a critical point. You can have a brilliant wellbeing policy, you can have incredible benefits offerings around the place, but if your manager role models unhealthy wellbeing behaviours, then it's shot. I think there's a stat, isn't there, that your manager affects your well-being more than your partner. And everyone's probably had a line manager that is testament to that point. We're lucky at Williams that James Vowles, our team principal, speaks really well and really believes in the people agenda. It's not true across the grid. I don't know if F1 fans in the room at Alpine have a particularly interesting situation at the moment.
Oh, he must be good.
Toto
He
Wolff
talks
is
about
good.
his mental health a lot, doesn't he? So
he's good.
A good role model.
But Alpine are an example of a team at the moment where it's the opposite, and they are struggling because from the very top the behaviours aren't healthy. But having a team principal or a CEO probably in corporate language is one thing, and you would hope it would then cascade, but then you just need, again, one manager who has a team of 10 who would upset that apple cart. So again, that's where education becomes important. But if you were going to invite leaders and managers to a training session on why wellbeing is important, you have to have that narrative up front again. Otherwise, they will sit there for an hour rolling their eyes.
And they also need to know some of the science as well, because you don't know that recovery is helping. It's invisible. So you can actually keep going at high performance for quite a long time before you start to notice it. By then it's quite late because your body will be starting to fall apart. And if you looked in your cells, you'd find they'd be full of toxins, there'd be all sorts of things, your brain. So it's that understanding of that 2-week policy is there for a reason. It's not just on performance, it's actually inside the body. But it's invisible, and that's the problem. Particularly when you're young, you can feel completely that you can do everything, and you can go on forever. And when there's a culture around it, and then it goes.
Like, what is this?
But it's such a good point because, again, bespoking this to whatever your industry is, Williams is full of engineers, so they absolutely love science and data. So it's really worthwhile putting that in there. And I think there are studies out there that show that if people work 120% of their working hours, their productivity at the beginning might be slightly higher than people who work 80%, but then over months and years it does that. And those that are at 80% are pretty consistent, 120% end up here. If you show that to a room full of engineers and people who get the science behind it, and they think, oh, wait a sec, so if we've been doing that for 30 years, where is our productivity versus where it could be if you realigned it? Then again, it's a brilliant way into. But data might not work depending on where you work. It might be a different tact that you take. Exactly, it might be more sort of people-based.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Having conversations help, don't they? We forget the art of the conversation that can open up all of this. Claire, Luke, thanks so much. Michael, thank you for support from the College of Medicine and your introduction, and Jane for organising everything, and thank you, Josh, for the filming. But thank you all for coming on a hot day. It's actually still quite cool in here. You wait till you go out to that room and you'll notice a big change. Please feel free just to sit here, or if you want to go next door with a coffee, there's still food there. Just so, it's a nice cool place, it's a nice place to be, so help yourself to whatever you want, and we'll be around for questions as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.